Recently, with all the St George's flags going up everywhere, there's been debate around the idea of English nationalism and English self identity. Now, I'm not English, I'm Northern Irish, and I'm British. I'm not English, but I love England and I love history, so hence the video. And England is a very big part of my country. My country is the United Kingdom. Um, so, of course, I'm interested in England and English history. It's just no brainer. And I've spent most of my life in England, so I'm not English, but England's a very big part of my life. I want to talk a bit about history because it seems to me that this phenomenon with the flags has come about from some sort of sense of protest at the small boats and against what they would perceive, I imagine, those putting up the flags as left wing overt political correctness. Here's the thing, or the issue I have with it. The flag doesn't offend me, and why would it? It's just the national flag of England. We could talk about St George's origins. The fact is, he was an early Roman Christian from what's now Asia Minor. It's thought that he had a mother who was of Palestinian descent and a father, I believe, of Syrian descent. Um, he's also shared by numerous other countries and cities as well as their patron saint, so he's not unique to England. But nevertheless, St George's flag is the English national flag. I have no problem with it at sporting events, at provided that isn't in the format of football hooliganism, because frankly, this country is not squeaky clean when it comes to that, and we're not out of the woods yet when it comes to obnoxious behaviour in the beautiful game. Only in 2021 there was serious violence broke out with that, so I've no problem with it in sporting events, provided that it's from good, decent fans and not yobs who want to use it to just behave like louts. That's a very ugly thing in the beautiful game, actually. But having it at sporting events makes sense. It's a national flag. Having it on council buildings makes sense. Absolutely. All of that's great. But I said it before, and I reiterate this, if you feel the need to paint the English flag on a roundabout or an ancient monument, to me that isn't really patriotic. It's not showing patriotism. It's just showing a kind of desperation to be relevant, to be, I don't know, maybe that's the wrong term, but it demonstrates insecurity. It's not genuine patriotism. And another point worth bearing in mind, why are these flags put up in the middle of the night? You know, we don't have a sporting event right now, particularly. The Lionesses were earlier in the year. The Olympics aren't going on. There's nothing to suggest any particular reason why these flags should be going up. And I think it's kind of, there's ironically a sort of right-wing political correctness that anyone who criticises them must therefore be a lefty or against a flag. Not so. Maybe normal people just don't see the need for them to be absolutely everywhere. And I came across an interesting caption the other day. It showed various ethnic minorities involved in, for example, food banks and charity endeavours and so on. And then it showed these Fox Patriots kind of sticking up the flags in the middle of the night. So I just think it's questionable. What is the motivation behind this? They insist that they're not racist, and I would even be charitable and say maybe they're not. Maybe that isn't what it's about. But my question to them is, what is it about? We know we're in England. We know that's the English flag. But what are you trying to prove? What exactly are you trying to prove? I mean, I think a lot of this came about from the fact one Labour council in one area took them down, ostensibly because there was health and safety things that hadn't been fixed up properly, and yet they allowed Palestinian flags to remain up. Okay, so double standards. But, really, is it necessary to have them absolutely everywhere? And people say, oh, we go to other countries and we see this. I don't think they're being entirely honest. In other countries, they're in specific areas. You don't see them absolutely everywhere. I'm fairly well travelled. Even in China, where nationalism is pretty rife, you don't see the Chinese flag absolutely everywhere. So I just think it's more symbolic of insecurity than genuine patriotism. Like why the need to show off? Why the need to prove something? It's the flag doesn't offend me. I just don't think it's needed everywhere, and I think there's a kind of hysterical right wing um, reaction to this, which is that if anyone questions it, they're immediately denounced as a lefty or unpatriotic. I would say someone who's helping society is a lot more patriotic than someone sticking up a flag in the middle of the night. Just my opinion. But on the subject of nationalism and on the subject of national identity, sticking with England, it's worth considering that, schools often teach 1066, the year 1066, as such a pivotal year in English and wider British history. And it is. That, of course, is the year of Hastings, the year of the Norman Conquest. It is a very important year in our history. But there is an argument that actually English history should be started from before that, because it did start before that. I watched a comedy series recently, Mind Your Language. It's a comedy about an English teacher in an adult language school in London with all sorts of nationalities. It was, it's kind of dated. It probably wouldn't be aired today. It plays up national stereotypes, but the running joke is each of the students comes from a different country and they sort of play to their national stereotype, and there's running gags about them learning English. I thought it was a pretty funny show, actually. But regardless, I remember one episode where the teacher, played by the late Barry Evans, said he was given a history lesson. He said it all began in 1066, and I'm thinking, wait a second, it didn't all begin in 1066. It's curious that the starting point of English history starts from the invasion. I got a little pack of cards with kings and queens at the Tower of London back in 1996, and it starts with William the Conqueror and it goes up to Elizabeth II. William the Conqueror was not the first English king. Perhaps the rationale behind this is the Normans introduced the numeracy system with monarchs, whereas before that they'd sort of been associated with an epithet, like Edgar the Peaceful, Ethelred the Unready, Edward the Confessor, and so on, rather than numeracy. I mean, Edward the First, that is Longshanks, known to history as Longshanks, was not the first King Edward in England, yet he is designated as Edward the First. So perhaps that's why we begin from that time, but I think actually we should be a bit more accurate. So I'm going to just read out a Wikipedia article, and I would make the case that the year 927 really should be considered the starting point of English history. There is also a claim for the year 954, but thinking of 927. I'm just going to read out the Wikipedia article here because it has pretty much what I want to say, so bear with me. This is early English history, history of Anglo-Saxon England. The article's about the Kingdom of England, 10th century to 1707, which of course was the Acts of Union. The Kingdom of England emerged from the gradual unification of the early medieval Anglo-Saxon kingdoms known as the Heptarchy. East Anglia, Mercia, Northumbria, Kent, Essex, Sussex and Wessex, and you'll notice that several of those names still exist. Kent, Essex and Sussex, although it's partitioned into East and West Sussex, survive as counties. Northumbria in this region is sometimes conflated with Northumberland, but actually Northumberland is smaller. Northumberland's a county. Northumbria was one of the petty kingdoms that stretched from the Humber right up to Edinburgh. East Anglia is a region. Mercia and Wessex are now gone, but the names are still preserved. And I believe Mercian ambulance is used, referring basically to the Midlands. Wessex was the southwest. The Viking invasions of the 9th century upset the balance of power between the English kingdoms and native Anglo-Saxon life in general. The English lands were unified in the 10th century in a reconquest completed by 927. So the English lands were unified by 927. That perhaps is the year that should be seen as important as 1066. During the Heptarchy, the most powerful king among the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms might become acknowledged as Britwalda, a high king over the other kings. and I believe that's actually a title. Yeah, ruler of Britain, rather than being an individual. The decline of Mercia allowed Wessex to become more powerful. This was the Wessex supremacy, absorbing the kingdoms of Kent and Sussex in 825. I think this was after the Battle of Adwalton, if I've got that right, or it might have been Allendon. There was a pivotal battle in that year. But a lot of the battles of that era, there's some uncertainty over exactly where they were placed. The kings of Wessex increasingly dominated the other kingdoms of England during the 9th century. In 827, Northumbria submitted to Egbert of Wessex at Dore, that's a village outside Sheffield, making Egbert the first king to reign over a united England. But this wasn't a permanent fixture, so that's why Egbert's not as famous as Alfred the Great or other successors. In 886, Alfred the Great retook London, which he apparently regarded as a turning point in his reign. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says that all of the English peoples, all Angelsin, probably pronouncing that wrong, not subject to the Danes, submitted themselves to King Alfred. Asser added that Alfred, king of the Anglo-Saxons, restored the city of London splendidly. This had been under Danish control at the time. They think the old Rhyme London Bridge is falling down dates from this period, and made it habitable once more, or at least the rhyme refers to that period. Alfred's restoration entailed reoccupying and refurbishing the newly deserted Roman walled city, building quays along the Thames and laying a new city street plan. And I believe that the city under the Saxon rule had been known as Londinium was the Roman city. I believe it was Londonvich, or I think it had that sort of title. Now, on the 12th of April, 927, the 12th of July, 927, ironically also an important day in Northern Ireland, the monarchs of Britain gathered at Eamont in Cumbria to recognise Athelstan as King of the English. The 12th of July, 927. Perhaps that's a day that should be just as important as the 23rd of April, St. George's Day. The title King of the English, or Rex Anglorum in Latin, was first used to describe Athelstan in one of his charters in 928. So perhaps we could also look at 928. The standard title for monarchs from Athelstan right up until King John, so this was going well after the Norman conquest, was King of the English. John, of course, spoke French as a primary language. During the following years, Northumbria repeatedly changed hands between the English kings and the Norwegian invaders, but was definitively brought under English control by Eadred in 954, completing the unification of England. In 1018, Lothian, a portion of the northern half of Northumbria, Bernicia, was ceded to the Kingdom of Scotland. This was the petty kingdom of Bernicia. So, of course, today Lothian is part of the Edinburgh region. England has remained in political unity ever since. So there's a few years there we could look at. 927, when Athelstan was recognised as King of the English. 928, under the Charter by Athelstan, or 954, when the conquest was complete under Eadred. But I would argue these dates are really symbolic as the foundations of what we now know as England. Before that, there was the petty kingdoms. There were the English, but there was not really a standing unified kingdom of England. So 927, I would submit, is perhaps a year that should be better remembered. It should be perhaps as notable as 1066. Perhaps so should 954. I'll try and get actually the specific battle that is associated with Eadred in that era. Let's see here. Eadred had a 9-year reign. 954, that name sounds familiar to me. I've studied Saxon history a little bit. That year sounds familiar. 954, let's see. Battle for control of Northumbria. This region, incidentally, Northumbria, basically northeast England, had a lot of violent conflict between the Danes, the Scots, the English. There's probably more battlefields in Northumberland than any other English county. Yeah, I thought there was a specific battle there. Can't quite find it. Anyway, I'm just going to submit this. So yeah, this whole thing about English nationalism, 1066, year of the Norman conquest, but maybe 927 as the foundation of England. That is to say, the year that Athelstan was declared king of the unified English. Perhaps that is the year this should be marked as the foundation of the Kingdom of England in the modern sense. And therefore, in 2 years, we will mark the 1100th anniversary of that. So, let me know your thoughts if you're English. I just find it puzzling that 1066 is seen as a starting point. William was an invader. William the Bastard, William the Conqueror. And actually, in the north of England, even his own scholars condemned his excesses, because there was, after the Norman conquest, there was a scorched earth campaign in the north of England known as the Harrying of the North. This was arguably a genocidal campaign against native Saxons, and somewhere in the region of 100,000 people died from a combination of massacres, famine, being exposed to the harsh winter. This was a very, very brutal period. The Norman conquest in general may have killed up to 160,000 people when you factor in the very bloody battles like Hastings and Stamford Bridge, plus the harrying of the North. It was a very, very violent and harsh time. William the Conqueror is thought to have been one of the per capita richest people in history because of what he acquired with the Kingdom of England and the lands of the sort of Saxon, I guess they would have been called, I think the term was Carls, but don't quote me on that. The earls, actually, the early earls would have been the Saxon lords. So William, of course, conquered that land and immediately acquired it. That was big estates, vast waves of land across what's now North Yorkshire, County Durham, Northumberland. Most of the English counties date from around that time. If you look at their foundations, you name it, Cheshire, Staffordshire, there's some sort of reference to them in the Domesday books. So most English counties can be dated to around that time. The oldest counties, of course, are those that were Saxon kingdoms. Kent, Essex, Sussex are arguably the oldest English counties. Cornwall, of course, has its own distinct identity. So anyway, that's a little bit of history. I find it very interesting. But I submit 927 should be important to, school children across this country as 1066. Let me know your thoughts.